What if the thing that calms your stress, sharpens your focus, and feels amazing today is quietly stealing years from your life? What if one of the most dangerous habits in human history feels good for a reason? Not because people are ignorant, not because they haven't seen the warning labels, not because they don't know the risks, but because, deep inside the brain, smoking is pressing some of the most powerful biological buttons we possess. I've always found that strangely unsettling. As someone who loves learning about biology, I've spent a lot of time wondering why humans do things that seem completely irrational on the surface. And smoking might be one of the most fascinating examples. Nearly everyone knows it can damage the lungs, increase the risk of cancer, strain the heart, and shorten life. Those facts are not hidden, they're everywhere, yet every day, millions of people still reach into their pockets, pull out a cigarette, and light it. Why? The easy answer is addiction. But I don't think that's the whole story, because addiction itself begins with something else. It begins with a reward. If we're going to understand smoking honestly, I think we have to start with a truth that makes many people uncomfortable. Smoking can feel amazing. For some people, it's a moment of calm in the middle of chaos. For others, it's a break from stress, a way to focus, a social ritual, or simply an escape from boredom. A cigarette can seem to make bad moments feel less painful, and good moments feel even better. That doesn't mean smoking is harmless. Far from it, but pretending these rewards don't exist makes it impossible to understand why so many people struggle to quit. And that's the mystery that keeps pulling me back. How can something so small create such a powerful sense of relief? How can a thin cylinder of dried leaves and chemicals convince the most complex organ in the known universe, the human brain, that it needs it? The answer lies in a journey happening inside the body, invisible to us, a journey that begins the moment smoke enters the lungs and ends with changes spreading throughout the brain, the blood vessels, the immune system, and nearly every organ we possess. So before we talk about disease, addiction, or death, let's start at the beginning and follow a single puff of smoke into the human body. Because what happens next is far more extraordinary and far more disturbing than most people realize. To understand why smoking can feel so powerful, we need to follow that puff of smoke beyond the lungs and into the command center of the human body, the brain. I've always found it remarkable how quickly biology can change the way we experience reality. One moment, a person may feel tired, stressed, distracted, or restless. Seconds later, after a single inhale, their mental state begins to shift. The speed of that transformation is what first made me curious about nicotine. As smoke travels through the airways and reaches the deepest regions of the lungs, it arrives at millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. These delicate structures exist for one purpose: exchanging molecules between the outside world and the bloodstream. Their walls are incredibly thin, almost unbelievably so, allowing oxygen to enter the blood with extraordinary efficiency. Nicotine takes advantage of this design. The moment it reaches the alveoli, it slips through their thin membranes and enters the circulation. From there, it races toward the brain. The journey is so fast that many smokers perceive the effects as almost immediate. And then something fascinating happens. If the brain were a giant control room filled with switches regulating attention, motivation, pleasure, stress, and energy, nicotine would be like someone rapidly flipping several of those switches at once. Dopamine begins to rise, creating a sense of reward and satisfaction. Adrenaline increases alertness and sharpens focus. Stress-related pathways shift. Natural pain-relieving chemicals are released. For a brief period, the brain enters a state that feels unusually compelling. What fascinates me most is that nicotine creates a combination that seems almost contradictory. It can make a person feel calmer while simultaneously making them more awake, more relaxed, yet more attentive, more comfortable, yet more energized. From a biological perspective, that's an incredibly attractive package. But as I learned more about neuroscience, I discovered something even more interesting. The brain is not a passive passenger in this process. It doesn't simply accept nicotine's influence. The moment those chemical changes begin, the brain starts fighting to restore balance, and that invisible struggle is where the story takes a much darker turn. And it is this constant battle for balance, happening silently inside the brain, that transforms a pleasurable experience into an addiction. The more I learn about biology, the more I realize that the human body is obsessed with stability. Nearly every system inside us is designed to keep conditions within a narrow range. Temperature, blood sugar, blood pressure, hormone levels, everything is constantly being adjusted. The brain operates the same way. When nicotine repeatedly pushes the brain in one direction, the brain responds by pushing back. At first, this adaptation is almost invisible. A smoker lights a cigarette, experiences the familiar rush, and moves on with their day. But beneath the surface, neurons are already changing, receptors adjust, chemical pathways adapt. The brain slowly learns to function in a world where nicotine regularly appears. What fascinates me is that addiction doesn't begin when smoking feels good. It begins when feeling normal starts to depend on smoking. As nicotine leaves the bloodstream, the brain's compensatory mechanisms don't disappear immediately. For a period of time, they remain active. The result is an uncomfortable imbalance. Stress feels sharper. Irritation appears more easily. Concentration becomes more difficult. A vague sense of unease begins to emerge. Then another cigarette arrives. Almost instantly, the discomfort fades. From the brain's perspective, a powerful lesson has just been learned. Whatever caused the unpleasant feeling, nicotine appeared and solved it. Repeat that cycle enough times, and the connection becomes deeply embedded. This is why I've come to view smoking differently than I once did. Many people imagine addiction as a relentless pursuit of pleasure. But in reality, much of addiction is the pursuit of relief. The goal gradually shifts from feeling great to simply avoiding feeling bad. And chemistry is only part of the trap. Humans are creatures of patterns. We attach behaviors to moments, places, and emotions. A morning coffee, a stressful workday, a long drive home, a conversation with friends. Over time, smoking becomes woven into the fabric of everyday life. By then, a smoker is no longer fighting a single craving. They're fighting a network of habits built over years. And while that struggle unfolds inside the mind, another far more visible form of damage is beginning to spread throughout the body. While addiction is quietly reshaping the brain, the rest of the body is paying a price that often remains invisible for years. One of the things I find most unsettling about smoking is how effectively it hides its damage. Human beings are naturally wired to respond to immediate consequences. Touch a hot stove, and you instantly pull your hand away. But smoking doesn't work like that. The reward arrives within seconds, while the damage accumulates so slowly that most people never feel it happening. Back in the lungs, the journey of cigarette smoke leaves behind more than nicotine. It leaves a residue of tar and thousands of chemical compounds. Normally, tiny hair-like structures called cilia help keep the airways clean, sweeping away dust, bacteria, and debris in a continuous wave of microscopic movement. It's an elegant system, one that most of us never think about because it works so well, but cigarette smoke gradually disrupts that system. Tar begins to coat the airways, the cilia become damaged and sluggish, mucus starts to accumulate faster than it can be cleared. What many people recognize as a smoker's cough is often the body's attempt to compensate for a cleaning system that is slowly breaking down. Deeper inside the lungs, the consequences become even more serious. The delicate alveoli, the structures responsible for transferring oxygen into the bloodstream, are not built to withstand years of chemical assault. Some lose their elasticity, others rupture entirely. Unlike a scraped knee or a minor cut, this damage cannot simply heal back to normal. Every destroyed air sac slightly reduces the lungs' ability to do the very thing they evolved to do: move oxygen into the body. What makes this even more troubling is that smoking doesn't stay confined to the lungs. Toxic compounds enter the circulation and travel everywhere. Blood vessels constrict, tiny injuries form along their walls, the heart is forced to work harder. The immune system remains trapped in a state of chronic activation, constantly responding to damage, while becoming less effective at protecting the body from genuine threats. To me, this is the true tragedy of smoking. The body spends years trying to repair itself, yet every cigarette adds new damage faster than those repairs can be completed. Eventually, the cumulative burden becomes impossible to ignore, and the consequences begin to surface in ways that can permanently alter a person's future. And that raises a question that I think many non-smokers underestimate. If the consequences are so severe, why is walking away from cigarettes often one of the hardest things a person will ever do? The more I've studied human behavior, the more I've come to appreciate how deeply habits become embedded in our lives. Smoking is rarely just about nicotine. It's about routines, emotions, memories, and moments that have been repeated so many times they begin to feel like part of a person's identity. A cigarette after a stressful day, a cigarette with a morning coffee, a cigarette during a conversation with friends. Over the years, these moments become connected. The brain starts treating smoking not as an isolated action, but as a familiar solution to countless situations. This is why quitting can feel like losing more than a substance. For many people, it feels like losing a ritual, a coping mechanism, or a companion that has been present during both good times and bad. What makes this especially tragic is that most smokers never consciously chose to build this relationship. Many began as teenagers, at a time when the brain is still developing and particularly sensitive to rewards, social acceptance, and new experiences. A decision made during adolescence can quietly shape decades of adult life. Yet despite everything we discussed, I don't think this story ends in hopelessness. In fact, one of the most inspiring things about biology is its capacity for recovery. The human body is constantly trying to heal, adapt, and restore balance. The moment someone stops smoking, that process accelerates. The heart no longer faces the same chemical burden. The lungs begin clearing accumulated debris. The risk of many diseases starts to decline. Even after years of exposure, positive changes begin almost immediately. Perhaps the most important lesson I've taken from this topic is that smoking is not a moral failure. It is a biological trap built on some of the most powerful reward systems ever shaped by evolution. But understanding that trap gives us power, because smoking ultimately offers relief from temporary discomfort while creating problems that can last a lifetime. And the more we understand how our biology influences our choices, the better equipped we are to make choices that serve the future version of ourselves rather than the impulses of the present moment. Perhaps the deepest lesson from smoking is not about cigarettes at all, it is about human nature. Our brains are wired to seek immediate relief, even when it comes at a long-term cost. The challenge is learning to pause and ask whether a choice is solving a problem or simply postponing it. This idea applies far beyond smoking to spending, eating, procrastination, and countless daily habits. The more aware we become of the invisible forces shaping our decisions, the more control we gain over our future. Small choices repeated consistently can either quietly damage our lives or gradually transform them for the better. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is one habit in your life that gives short-term comfort but may have long-term consequences? Please share your answer in the comments so everyone can learn from different perspectives and experiences. If you enjoyed this video and want more science-based explorations of the human body, health, and the hidden biology behind everyday life, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps motivate us to keep creating more thoughtful and fascinating content in future videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.